Greetings and salutations. Welcome to our first module in the series, Foundations in Longevity and Aging. Our inaugural module will provide a crash course into the introduction to gerontology, or the holistic study of aging and the aged. These practices that we're going to discuss today and throughout this series apply both across the lifespan, throughout the care continuum, and from our homes to skilled nursing facilities. And in many instances, what we discuss applies to us as well as those to whom we're giving care. We would like to offer our profound thanks to our curriculum team, Annette Clark, Jennifer Pryor, Raleigh Pretty, Jenny Inker, Annette Kelly, and of course, Ann Welliford and myself. We would also like to recognize the amazing Nico Stankulescu and the team at World Events Forum for this webinar platform. As this is a recorded webinar, we will not have an opportunity for a live question and answer period. You will want to have a pen and paper handy for discussion and question notes. And we will also have several questions for you to consider throughout our time together today. Please direct questions to your webinar proctor or to agingstudies@vcu.edu, and we will be happy to continue this conversation. As always, this webinar is for educational purposes. It is meant to inform, but not to supplant, any licensing regulations, physician order, or plan of care. This webinar is not to be viewed as a directive or instruction on how to administer care. The VCU Department of Gerontology and the Longevity Project for a Greater Richmond are not responsible for the application of these educational practices. So as my colleague Ann Welliford would say, let's get to getting. My name is Jay White, and I'm a gerontologist, and I will be your guide through this module. Before we get started on what gerontologists want you to know, I'd like to share a bit about myself as a gerontologist. Most people don't get to meet many gerontologists, and I think this will be helpful as we move forward. So here goes. As a gerontologist, I'm in the longevity business. My work is values-based. More specifically, I focus on longevity equity. So longevity equity, what do I mean by that? While we have seen an increase in longevity globally over the many generations, longevity is not something that all people or all communities of people have the opportunity to experience and enjoy. My values as a gerontologist call me to raise up longevity equity and inclusion related to ageism, implicit bias, and systemic prejudice for all people across the lifespan, and call for communities that are great places for all people to grow older. Additionally, my values as a gerontologist call me to be person-centered. We will talk more about person-centered care throughout these series, but in a nutshell, I can share that evidence-based gerontological practice, but each individual drives their own decision-making. As my friend and colleague and Elder Voices member Judy Nelson puts it, there is no "if I were you" when it comes to person-centered care. Evidence-based gerontological practice means that what you will hear and learn in our journey together is based on addressing needs expressed by the community with really rigorous data and practice from the generations of scholars and practitioners who have come before us. But a little more on that later. So I follow Baltes' lifespan approach. Paul Baltes was one of these scholars who originated many gerontological theories related to a lifespan approach to aging and longevity. In essence, what we do when we're young profoundly informs and influences our older selves. Here are the questions we are going to review in our time together today. What are the 5 things gerontologists want you to know about longevity and aging? 1, so what is successful aging? 2, is there a fountain of youth? Number 3, if I need care, who will take care of me? 4, how am I going to pay for this care? And 5, but really, what should I expect as I grow older? So back to Balke's lifespan approach. Given that Paul Baltes is an important foundational figure in the evidence-based gerontological practice I mentioned, let's spend a little more time on his lifespan perspective. According to Baltes, aging is development. It is a lifelong, multidimensional, and by multidimensional, I mean biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual. It's also multidirectional, content specific, and historically embedded. Lifelong means that no life phase or developmental niche is better or worse than any other. Multidirectional means that all life phases include growth, maintenance, and loss regulation. Development is multidimensional, and again, that is biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual, or holistic. And because of the biomedicalization of aging, the dominant focus of longevity has been on physiological aging, which is perceived as decline. And this is counter to the holistic biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual approach, and it omits the majority of the whole person. The psychological, social, spiritual aspects tell a much deeper and richer story about our individual aging. This is terribly problematic and dangerous to just go on the physiological aspects of aging. Think of this older version of you. Would you want folks just to see you for your bowel and bladder functions or cognitive abilities? Or would you want your preferences, likes, dislikes, spiritual values, and that you're a lifelong football fan to be known? Here's a wonderful quote in The Danger of a Single Story. Inherent in the power of stories is a danger of only knowing one story about a group. This single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but they're incomplete. They make the one story become the only story. So let's pause for a moment and let this thing sink in. The single story. As I mentioned before, do you just want to be known for your medical history? And how does this narrow single focus rob us of our essence? What makes us us? How is this single story narrative relevant outside of our discussion today? And we'll talk more about this in our Disrupt Ageism model. Development is context specific. Not only are we all each one whole bio, psycho, social, spiritual vessel, but that vessel exists, it operates, and it lives and grows older within numerous contexts. Think about it. Who am I? I identify as a man, but also as a white man and a gerontologist, a white man and a gerontologist who is an animal lover, a white man who is a gerontologist, animal lover, and son of John and Norma. Each of these identities informs who I am, and each identity is just as relevant as the other. Each impacts each other immediately and across time. Like Paul Baltes, Yuri Bronfenbrenner is another scholar whose works inform evidence-based gerontological practice. From 1917 until 2005, he was a Russian-born American psychologist who was most known for his ecological systems theory. His work with the United States government helped the information and the formation of the Head Start program in 1965. Bronfenbrenner's ability research was key in changing the perspective of developmental psychology by calling attention to the large number of environmental and societal influences on child development. We each live our lives within a familial unit of some sort, within a broader community or neighborhood, and within a larger society. We are not only shaped by the people and processes within each context, we also shape the people and processes themselves. This is also historically embedded. What has happened to us? What have we experienced? What have we survived or lived through? The times we live in make an enormous difference in how we experience our own longevity and the longevity of our communities. The time we live in impacts this unprecedented life expectancy and trend in many ways. We have healthcare, education, technology, and our growing awareness of disparities that impact all longevity equity. So to reiterate, my work as a gerontologist is grounded in evidence-based gerontological practice to expand beyond implicit bias or our own personal hidden prejudices and the single story, or it happened exactly this way and no other possible way. The more we know about evidence-based gerontological practice, things like what Baltes and Bronfenbrenner have discussed, the more optimistic the picture becomes about growth and opportunities, as well as work to be done to promote longevity equity for all people. Another thought I would like to share is to think about the me in aging and the aging me. We are all aging people. There is no us and them. There is no those older people. Remember when I said earlier that this content applies to us as much as it applies to those we give care? When we're talking about older adults, we're talking about our future selves. I hope in sharing what we know about evidence-based gerontological practice that I can help reframe people's thinking from the fixed mindset of the single story of growing older. So let's get on with it. What gerontologists want you to know. So what is successful aging? Regarding successful aging, I love the following quote from Joseph Campbell, a well-known professor and mythologist. He says, bringing forth what is in you is mostly about creating the right conditions. And from a biological, psychological, sociological, and spiritual perspective, these conditions are layered and interconnected. Layered and interconnected. Let's see if we can unpack this a bit. The concept of successful aging has come in and out of popularity in the past several decades as our research and understanding have expanded. And it rides the pendulum of personal responsibility. First, let's talk about the language and say what we really mean. If aging is just another word for living or development, then what we're really seeking is the best longevity. The concept of successful aging has been historically oversimplified for four main reasons. One, as we discussed, the single story resulting from the biomedicalization of aging has led to an overemphasis on physiological aging, and the single story has equated decline. However, number two, successful aging is hard to pinpoint because what is best for me may not be what is best for you. As we mentioned before, my friend and colleague Judy Nelson says, there is no if I were you in person-centeredness. And I believe the same thing about longevity. As a gerontologist, I can share evidence-based tools for promoting longevity, but it's up to you ultimately to mix the right recipe for yourself. The individuation trajectory tells us that people become more different from each other as we grow and age and experience. This is in part due to the contextual nature of development. What you're born with plays a role for sure, but as we grow older, our lived experience and lifestyle have an even greater impact and effect. Historically, most perspectives have focused on individual factors, placing the onus of success on the individual. While lifestyle does play a large role in longevity, so do environment and community and systems, particularly as they relate to safety and access and opportunities for enrichment. And longevity, my friends, is not a level playing field. While some individuals and communities are experiencing increases in longevity, some are not. And others are seeing decreases in longevity. For example, in some cities across the United States, life expectancy varies by up to 20 years between neighborhoods and zip codes less than 10 miles apart. Let's stop and think about that for a moment. From a developmental gerontology standpoint, let's focus on how you live your best longevity by making individual choices and raising awareness and voice about longevity equity. So, from an evidence-based gerontological practice, what are some of the current understood practices related to longevity? Thinking of longevity from a gerontological lens, person-centered care, lifespan, biopsychosocial, spiritual, I'd like to turn this question back to each of us as individuals and ask, as you living your best life and promoting your own positive longevity, are you doing this? So let's recall the Bronfenbrenner slide we just reviewed. All of these aspects impact how we live and age. They all contribute to our longevity, and each impacts us differently. So I want you to start thinking differently. The master narrative in our society is that we get more alike as we age, when in truth, we become more unique. Because of all the things we've just talked about, they impact us differently at different times and on different levels. We may all start to look older, but the story goes so much deeper when you get beyond the biological manifestation of aging and longevity. So you've heard me talk about biopsychosocial spiritual. Let's talk about this a little bit more. For a little context, sometimes you might hear biopsychosocial spiritual referred to as holistic or mind, body, spirit, or whole person. Again, in person-centered care, we mean the whole person. From a biological standpoint, is your body healthy from a functional standpoint? Are you able to perform daily activities that you want and need to perform? From a psychological standpoint, how do you feel about your ability to cope with day-to-day experiences? Do you feel resilient? Are you motivated to participate in activities you enjoy and that bring meaning and purpose to your day? How do you feel about your cognition, your emotional regulation, your ability to manage stress? And how about socially? How do you feel about your roles and goals and engagement with people around you? Do you feel like your environment is enriching? And again, by aging, let's remember that we're not just referring to expected physical decline. When we talk about aging, we're also talking about all of the good things that happen as we grow older, such as growing into more of who we are as individuals, being selective and knowing who and what we like, pursuing projects we're more passionate about, and developing deeper meaning in relationships relevant to our goals in life and new goals. In gerontology, we are never talking about just one dimension of growing older. We're talking about all of them at the same time. What about spirituality? Do you feel a sense of meaning, connection, and purpose in your world? Do you feel connected to the world around you? Once again, bringing forth what is in you is mostly about creating the right conditions. Take a moment to think about your reaction to each of these biopsychosocial spiritual areas that play into your own life and your positive longevity. Are there areas that you feel good about? Successful, maybe? Are there areas that you think could use some tweaking? Are there areas that you believe are not actually under your control? Areas have to do with community safety or working conditions, or access to enriching environments, or our own personal care. Some of the barriers we talk about in our purple zone modules relate to these, again, barriers to successful aging and longevity. These are also the focus of the Longevity Project for a Greater Richmond, as we work together to make our communities a great place for all people to grow old. We recognize that longevity equity is a goal we must all address together. These are questions that gerontologists help to answer. But first, we begin with you and what success means to you. Without a person-directed lens and without understanding your own motivation and goals, no recommendations or care plans or prescriptions will make a difference. As the saying goes, the best type of exercise for you is the one that you'll actually do. And this leads me to item number 2, question number 2, if you will. Is there a fountain of youth? As a gerontologist, I hear questions like this often. Invoking our developmental gerontological lens, youth is not the goal nor the ideal. Balti's lifespan perspective suggests that developmentally there are pros and cons present with each life phase or developmental niche. Each developmental niche includes growth, maintenance and decline, or loss regulation. So as we, along with us in all of this journey, strive to use our gerontological language, let's think not of youth as the goal, but health or wellness and positive longevity as the goal. If we reframe the question from, is there a fountain of youth, to, is there a fountain of wellness? I would respond yes, without a doubt, absolutely. Or rather, there are actually 4 fountains. So let's talk about the basics of a good care plan. And once again, we'll be breaking this down into our biopsychosocial perspective. Biological is physical health, and our current understanding seems to follow the mantra, healthy heart equals healthy brain. And the things that promote both are understood to be moderate and regular physical activity like walking, eating mostly a Mediterranean diet, and very important, stress relief. More detail about physical health practices is provided in other modules listed in the additional readings section of this presentation. Let's take a look at the physical activity guidelines for Americans. The My Activity Pyramid for adults is based on, again, the physical activity guidelines for Americans. As you can see, the pyramid is divided into 4 pieces. Lifestyle activity, which should occur every day. Aerobic activity with a goal of 140 minutes of moderate activity per week. Strength and flexibility at least twice a week. And limited inactivity. So let's talk about HALT, never allowing yourself to become too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Psychological health or well-being includes your cognition, or understanding and awareness, your personality, emotions, and coping ability. These are best promoted through novel and enriching experiences to enhance cognition. Try to do something new every day. It's also about openness to new experiences and conscientiousness in our personality style. It's also associated with positive longevity. Novel and challenging experiences also present challenges that promote opportunities to exercise our brains and build coping and resilience. For example, the social gerontologist Warner Shea's work from the Seattle longitudinal study encourages that we enjoy the bustle and have smart and diverse friends. Wisdom and emotional regulation also benefit from novel experiences and the optimal level of challenge and stress. And just so we're all on the same page, a longitudinal study means that this study was done over a long period of time to generate deeper and richer data. These kinds of data really make sense when we're studying longevity. Social well-being comes from satisfaction with their roles and goals and social connectedness, as we mentioned on the previous slide. Social well-being comes with satisfaction with our roles and goals and social connectedness, as we mentioned on the previous slide. None of these are about quantity. Really, rather, they are about individual meaning and purpose and a felt sense of belonging. Generativity, or a sense of contributing to the future, is a component of social well-being as well. And it can be a bit complicated because generativity, too, is significantly person-centered. It seems that in order to feel that your life has been generative, you have to be contributing according to your own sense of purpose and meaning, not just others believe you have made contribution. In fact, as we grow older, we often become more selective in our engagement as a method of goal direction and honing our interactions to the most meaningful and enjoyable. It becomes less and less about networking toward goal attainment and more about the goal of enjoyment and personal meaning. You can learn more about this in Laura Carstenson's TED Talk, listed in your resource list. There's also a surge in the focus on loneliness right now. And it's important to remember that loneliness or social isolation aren't just solely about quantity of contacts, but rather about the sense of belongingness and satisfaction with the quantity and quality of those contacts. In addition, these again are hugely individually determined and based on one's satisfaction with the quantity and quality of social connections, like we discussed before. There's no universal quantity of connections that's right. You just want to ask yourself the question, do I have enough people in my life, and am I satisfied with those relationships? So let's review this connectedness continuum again. Social connectedness is a multifactorial construct. In other words, there are many, many layers to consider. This infographic attempts to visualize that social connection and social connectedness are simultaneous. At the same time, we're looking at structural, or the environment and access to things, functional, support and tasks in life, qualitative, feelings and emotions. Much of the research studying social isolation has looked at single factors. However, there is no single predictor of social isolation, and not all predictors carry equal weight. Tracy Gendron and Ann Welliford have done a great deal of research into this. When we think about social connectedness, there are a number of related terms, each with multiple definitions and all expressing an aspect of diminished social connectedness. Let's look at loneliness, a perceived dissatisfaction in the quality of social relationships. Social isolation, low or no social networks and supports. Physical isolation, no or low access to people, places, services, and resources. And let's look at social supports, people and services available to assist when we need them, like with rides, errands, access to care, interpretation, encouragement. The infographic on this slide depicts all of these concepts as occurring together, as I mentioned. They're also occurring together on a continuum and in the context of self and our relationship with others and with the environment we live in. In short, they're moving and changing all the time. As researcher Helene Jaffe noted, people slip in and out of loneliness. It's also important to remember that loneliness isn't the same as just being alone. Feeling alone is different than being alone. Different people need different levels of social interaction, which is why self-perception is an important part of understanding loneliness and isolation, and it changes as we age. Where and how does social isolation occur? In a variety of settings. It's objective and subjective. Social isolation may be experienced at both an individual and a community level. At the individual level, behavior changes can occur for someone who may be experiencing social isolation. So let's look back again at the infographic. Let's also refer to Gigi Amato's future module on social connectedness for a greater and more in-depth definition. Okay, so let's tackle spirituality and religiosity. Spirituality, where do I find meaning? How do I feel connected? How should I live? Religiosity, what practices, rites, or spiritual rituals should I follow? What is right and wrong? What is true and false? And spirituality and religiosity overlap in belief, comfort, reflection, ethics, and awe and wonderment. Often, spirituality and religiosity are terms that are used interchangeably. However, there are these distinct differences between the two items. While spirituality may incorporate elements of religion, it is generally a broader concept. Religion and spirituality are not the same thing, nor are they entirely distinct from one another. There is this overlap. Spiritual well-being does not seem to get much press, and yet when we ask older people about their primary coping mechanisms, faith and spirituality frequently top the list. Spirituality offers opportunity to explore beliefs and ethics, find comfort, reflect, and it offers sources of meaning, direction, and belongingness. One's faith can promote positive emotions through experiences of hope, gratitude, and empathy, and protect against negative emotions during times of stress and loss. It's really a protective factor. To think of these as the four fountains of wellness, happily ever after is a day-to-day business. We want to encourage regular check-ins and tiny tweaks to promote wellness versus disease in each area. We want to create routines to flush out stress. And again, we'll talk more about this in our Purple Zones module later on. We talk about downshifting from some of the longest lived people around the globe. Okay, let's take a look at the third question gerontologists want you to know. If I need care, who will take care of me? The majority of care across the lifespan is provided by family and friends, or what we call family kin keepers. You may have heard of a term like fictive kin or family caregivers. These are the folks who are also the glue that keep our villages together. Dr. Laura Brown is a researcher who looks at the role of women in serving as this glue in biopsychosocial spiritual connectivity. It is essential that we have these conversations with family and friends and plan for ourselves what works best for our own unique situations. It's also very important to write it down. In the United States, family and friends provide 75% of the support and services needed. The formal long-term care system provides the rest of the needed services. There are resources in your module supplemental materials to assist with these personal explorations and conversations. The V-sheets, 5 wishes, and personal care plan materials. We also want to look at resources like the UAI, Virginia 211, No Wrong Door, and Virginia Navigator to support us. Okay, let's take a good look at this graphic. We stated the numbers before, but we really need them to sink in. 75% of care is provided by family and kin, or a family of friends. 75%. We will talk more in later modules about the joys and benefits of caregiving, as well as compassion fatigue and end-of-life care. But the basic premise is you are very likely to be a caregiver. So let's be prepared for this honor, because it's really hard work. The network of systems around us, or long-term care support services, are home and community-based services, they're residential and medical, and they're residential and assisted. A person may move through the different levels of long-term care as their functional status changes. Challenges with activities such as cooking, cleaning, managing money, and shopping would usually necessitate increased assistance on the part of family and friends. When the family and friends cannot provide assistance, they may ideally first consider obtaining home and community-based services, such as meals delivered to the home, like Meals on Wheels. Should the combination of increased informal support and community services no longer be adequate, the next step may be to engage in home care services, adult day support services, or an assisted residential care facility known as assisted living. Finally, if significant problems with activities such as dressing, eating, bathing, or toileting, and obtaining supportive services in the assisted living facility become too onerous, one may consider moving to the medical residential facility, such as a nursing home or skilled nursing facility. There is no general financing of long-term care costs. Let me say that again. There is no general financing of long-term care costs. Most people pay privately for long-term care support services. Formal long-term care services are paid for through a various network of methods. While Medicare provides some support for acute illness, there is no general financing of these long-term care costs. Again, most people pay privately for these services. Medicare will pay for rehab services only for a short time following a specific acute injury. Medicaid pays for about 1/2 of nursing home care, but that is only for people who have no resources and an income that will not cover the cost of their nursing home care. Payment for care in assisted living facilities is all private, directly from the consumer. Some community agencies help with the cost of home and community services, but they are also, again, primarily paid from private funds. And we'll talk more about this in just a moment. So let's talk about the aging network. And for more information on this, we want to look at 40 Issues for an Aging Society, an ebook by Dr. Jim Cotter. The Aging Network, services provided by the Aging Network. This is a secret that needs to be shared with everyone. There is a nationwide network of places to go to for help to find these needed services for older adults. The Aging Network was set up under the Older Americans Act, first passed in 1965 and recently ratified again. The Older Americans Act established an agency for older persons at each level of government in the United States. At the federal level, there's the Administration on Aging. Its role is to coordinate programs for older persons among the agencies in Washington and to lead the rest of the aging network in helping society assist older adults. At the state level, each state has a state unit on aging. These agencies develop programs and advocate for older persons in state government, and they lead the area agencies on aging in that state. In localities around the nation, there are area agencies on aging who provide assistance and services directly to older persons in their communities. There are 655 area agencies on aging throughout the United States. They have different names based on their history and community, but there is one that serves every locality. So wherever an older person lives, there is an agency to call for needed help. There is a website at the Administration on Aging that provides links to the right area agency on aging based on your zip code, city, or county. You will find resources to assist you in these module materials in the supplemental unit. Okay, So let's spend some time talking about the services provided by our area agencies on aging. And in Virginia, there are 26. By law, AAAs, or area agencies on aging, do have to concentrate on those in greatest economic and social need. The AAAs do, however, provide information to everyone. Area agencies are a great place to start to seek help for an older adult. They can direct an older person or their family member to a case manager or another agency that may be able to provide services the elder needs or wants. This is especially helpful for out-of-town relatives and friends of kinkeepers and family who are attempting to assist older loved ones through a long-distance relationship. So continuing our conversation about the types of care available, let's discuss more about the all-important question, how am I going to pay for all of this? When planning for our own successful aging, it seems wise, no matter where the pendulum is swinging, to choose a village and join a village. And by village, we're talking about a network of friends, like the family kinkeepers we have discussed, or a network of family and support services, but they all help us sustain us as we live and age. The public policy trends of the last decades have shifted away from public support for long-term care. This means each older person must take more personal responsibility. We must build and manage our livelihood, our finances, our own health, and our own lives. How will a retiree pay for 30 years of retirement and leisure? How will we pay for increasing amounts of health care? Where will we live? What must we do to stay healthy and fit? What kind of 90-year-old will a 60-year-old become? These are all questions each older person must consider now, both for our aging selves and our loved ones. For people, just like organizations, a healthy revenue mix is a diverse revenue mix. There is no single source of funding that will cover long-term care living expenses. With the increased emphasis on personal responsibility for our financial well-being, we will need to know something about how diverse revenue streams can and can't work for us in our old age. We can think about those revenue sources as a six-legged stool. We'll briefly review each one of these sources and their role in the long-term care financing continuum. So what exactly does a six-legged stool look like? Let's first count on Social Security, the first leg. Let's spend a brief minute on the basics of Social Security. And Social Security, for peace of mind, is not at all bankrupt. You can count on Social Security. Social Security is the support society gives to older adults. It's an acknowledgement that older people have worked hard and done the best they can for society, so they deserve support when they can no longer work. It is also a way for society to open up job opportunities for younger workers. It's a societal compact or an agreement between generations, and public support is still very strong. Social Security supports payments to older workers from two sources. The first is a trust fund that has built up value when all the workers contributed and there was money left over in excess of the payments. The surplus is put in a trust fund for future use. The second source is the ongoing contributions from current workers via their Social Security deductions and paychecks. Future workers are then expected to pay contributions into the Social Security Fund. There are three parts of Social Security. The first is the retirement support in old age, or old age insurance, as we've talked about. The second is disability insurance. If a worker becomes disabled and cannot work, they are entitled to disability payment under Social Security. The Third part is life insurance, called survivor's benefits. If a worker dies, payments can be made to the person's widow and children until the children are 18 years of age. Retirement benefits are calculated based on the lifetime earnings of the worker, although there is a cap on contributions for high incomes. The longer one works and the higher the income, the higher the Social Security payment. The maximum payment in 2011 is about $2,400 per month, and the average payment is about $1,200 per month, and there is no minimum payment. Retirement benefits can begin as early as 62. However, at age 62, the benefits are reduced and equal to about 75% of the full benefits that can be paid to any worker. The current retirement age is gradually increasing from 65 to now 67. For people born after 1943, it is 66 years of age, and for those born after 1960, it is 67 years of age. Full benefits would be paid for retirement at these ages. Social Security benefits provide the majority of retirement income for 40% of older adults. For 20% of older persons, Social Security accounts for 80% of their income. Let's think about that. For 1/5 of older persons, these monthly Social Security payments account for 80% of their income. When Social Security began, there were many workers for every retiree. Things have changed. The older population is growing from formerly about 6% of the population in 1940 to about 20% of the population in 2040. As you can see, a 14% increase in 100 years. Thus, there are more older retirees in need of support by fewer workers. This leads to concerns over the viability of the Social Security system and calls for reform. Some call for the privatization of Social Security so that the government would not be involved in an individual's retirement. Others call for reform of Social Security to ensure that future retirees will receive full payments. Reform options include raising the retirement age, reducing the benefits, or increasing the level of Social Security contributions. The soundness of the system will depend on politics, not its strength. But we don't want to count on just Social Security. Social Security was never designed to be the only source of income in retirement. It was designed to prevent poverty in older persons without an adequate support system available to them. And no one ever expected a person to live well on Social Security alone. That's why it's just one leg of the stool. So let's take a look at the other 5 legs. The second leg of the stool, as you will see, has traditionally been pensions. Although some pensions remain, this source of retirement income has now evolved into what we're calling 401ks. These are retirement saving vehicles based on a partnership between the worker and an employer. The individual worker contributes part of their income into a 401k plan, and the employer, sometimes, but not all the time, matches that part of the income with a contribution. When the employee leaves the organization, the 401k moves along with that employee, or, if retired, is the source of retirement income. An employee also might put savings into a retirement vehicle such as an IRA or individual retirement account. These savings are not tied up to employment at a specific company. They're tied to the individual. The third leg of the stool is assets and other savings. These may include emergency savings and assets such as a home or rental property or other investments. The fourth leg of the stool equals medical coverage. Once retired, these may come out as a sort of retirement income. Even with Medicare, the amount the individual must pay out for medical care is rising so fast that this may need to be considered as its own separate savings line. The money would be used to purchase health insurance, supplemental to Medicare, to pay for out-of-pocket expenses, and to fund long-term care insurance. In addition to medical savings or supplemental medical insurance and policies, savvy consumers are wise to understand the basics about Medicare and Medicaid and how these sources may factor into long-term care planning. Medicare and Medicaid have important and very distinct roles in covering healthcare expenses. We'll talk more specifically about Medicaid in just a moment. Under this category of medical coverage, there is also a growing choice of long-term care insurance policies. The policies are, to an extent, improving. And it's hard to craft a policy that survives over the course of a 30-plus year term of benefits and keeping up with all these appropriate ancillary costs. Each person's circumstances are different. People with large, supportive families may not need a formal long-term care insurance policy, but a single female, given a long life expectancy, who does not anticipate having children and who has no extended family, might consider some kind of insurance arrangement for formal long-term care. So let's take a look at the fifth leg of the stool, and this is employment or income. Earlier, I mentioned that Social Security was in part a strategy to make way for younger people to access jobs as older people retired. Retirement is essentially a made-up concept for ushering older people out of the workforce and usher younger workers in. Out of necessity or desire, many people choose not to retire or to change careers or reduce their hours fully rather than retire. Income from employment, hobbies, art, part-time jobs, etc., can be an important part of post-retirement budgeting. We look at more meaningful employment rather than more lucrative. The sixth leg of the stool is public benefits. The public benefits system includes a variety of supports that may be helpful in long-term care planning. Even if we never foresee utilizing food stamps or other types of means-tested relief, it's important that we know that there's a safety net there. Another example is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Traditionally, we don't think of the Earned Income Tax Credit as available for people over 60. However, if we're raising grandchildren or the parents of an adult child with a disability, the Earned Income Tax Credit would provide a tax-free cash benefit of up to $3,000. So how do we actually pay for long-term health care? Let's take a deeper dive into how Medicare and Medicaid work and don't work in covering long-term care. Let's make sure we have our pens and paper here for notes, because Medicare and Medicaid are very distinct and very complicated. So let's refresh our understanding about what long-term care is. Long-term care begins when a person can't take care of themselves. Long-term care illnesses, by definition, last a long time. They are chronic illnesses or disabilities that are expected to last for more than 3 months. Again, more than 3 months. The Congressional Budget Office defines long-term care as the medical, social, and personal care, as well as support services needed by people who have lost some capacity for self-care because of a chronic illness or condition. Long-term care can occur in a nursing facility, an assisted living facility, or in your personal home. So who receives these long-term care support services? And you will want to write this down. Researchers estimate that about 2% of those under 65 use long-term care, or about 3.3 million people. About 17%, or about 5.6 million people over the age of 65, use long-term care. So about 2/3 of the long-term health care is for older disabled persons and 1/3 for younger disabled persons. So who covers this long-term care? Two sources for almost all long-term care services: the individual's private resources and, as noted above, Medicaid. Medicaid, however, only covers a person once they are at poverty level, having used up all of their assets and income to pay for medical care. Medicare will not cover your long-term care expenses. Please write this down. Medicare will not cover your long-term care expenses. Medicare, as we've said before, covers therapy after a hospitalization, even if that therapy occurs in a long-term care facility like a nursing home. And I'll say this one more time. Medicare will not cover your long-term care expenses. So here's how it most often works. Your Aunt Abby, who lives alone, has a severe stroke and can't look after herself anymore. For a while, she may be able to get long-term care services in her community, in her home, from family and friends, and by paying for her long-term care out of pocket. But eventually, she needs a nursing home with a cost of $60,000 plus per year. And let me add, that's a lesser expensive nursing home. Who can afford that? She lives on a small pension and Social Security, two legs of the stool that we just mentioned. Most of her wealth and her assets are in her home. So Aunt Abby sells her house for, say, $240,000, and she can pay for nursing care for 4 years. After the 4 years, she still needs care, and the nursing home social worker gets her on Medicaid because Aunt Abby can't pay her nursing home bill. And the family doesn't have the funds to pay $60,000 or more per year. From then on, once all assets and resources are exhausted, Medicaid pays the bill. But Medicaid doesn't pay the nursing facility as much for the care as Aunt Abby did from when she had private funds. So they really don't want Aunt Abby when she's on Medicaid because they don't get as much of a reimbursement. Most would continue to care for her, but some will reduce the level of her care. She may have to move from a private room to a semi-private room. Some may not accept her back if there's a hospitalization or a transfer in care. So if possible, it's important to save enough on top of retirement in order to handle long-term care expenses. Time to start planning for these expenditures is sooner rather than later. Okay, so the fifth question that gerontologists would like you to know: what really should I expect as I grow older? Well, we call it growing older for a reason. Everyone experiences longevity differently, and aging or development involves growth maintenance and decline or loss regulation, as we've said. So you've heard me use the term multidimensional, biopsychosocial spiritual, and it's not a single story. You've heard me say this about development. So when I think about what you can expect, that is what you can expect: multi-dimensional development. Now, what exactly does that look like? So when we talk about health from a biopsychosocial spiritual standpoint, we're talking about the whole person and his or her aging. This is what we most typically hear about largely due to the biomedicalization of aging and the single story. But it's really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to human development. So some of the 12 biological expectable changes we talk about are brain, vision, hearing, gums, heart, bones, muscles, metabolism, our large intestines, urinary tract, sexual health, and skin. So in these 12 items, no one is denying any changes. They are very real. However, the expectable changes occurring in these body systems are not the ones that interfere with daily life. If a change interferes with daily life, this indicates pathology, either an illness or injury, like pain, a challenge with mobility, a change in mind, a change in mood. So pain, mobility, mind, mood that significantly interfere with daily functioning. These changes do not represent normal aging. Let me reiterate. Pain, challenges with mobility, changes in mind and cognitive functioning, and changes in mood do not represent normal aging. And each of these expectable changes may vary widely across the individual. They're impacted by lifestyle and environment, and they are impacted by the dominant cultural narrative, which is decidedly ageist. So let's talk about the biological aspects of aging. When we study biological aging from a normative and non-normative standpoint, what we see here are some things that I like to call the biological expectables. And by I mean myself and Ann Wellerford, because this is really her original research that I am discussing here. So let's refer back to our definition. Biological aging is a gradual and spontaneous process. The slide above summarizes some of these normal expectables. The changes you see listed here are changes that are experienced by most gradually over adulthood. Gradually. So here's what you need to know about others' experiences and what to expect. We talk about brain size and weight decreasing, blood vessels stiffening, vital capacity in lungs does decline, bones shrink in size and density, there's joint cartilage breakdown, muscles do lose strength and flexibility, skin becomes less elastic, hair grays and becomes thinner, the ability to see objects diminishes, the ability to hear high frequency sounds diminishes, kidney filters blood more slowly, the bladder becomes less elastic, there's structural change in the large intestines. In men, testosterone decreases, women experience menopause. These are some of the expectables. So let's look at some of the things that we can do to challenge the expectables. Actually, in fact, bone density and muscle mass can be improved through weight-bearing exercise. Flexibility and range of motion can be maintained and improved through physical activity. Happiness increases as we age. Well-being improves. A positive mindset is more common. Elders experience reduced stress. We have a higher capacity for empathy. We have a greater ability for emotional regulation. And look at semantic memory, our crystallized intelligence. And let's also take a future look at our module on differentiating depression and dementia for more about crystallized and fluid intelligence. But our crystallized intelligence increases as we age. We have better decision making. We have better integrative thought. We have higher executive functioning. We have the wisdom of our experience. We know how to tell a good story. We have greater self-confidence. And our sex life can even improve through self-exploration and experience with a loving and committed partner. So once again, seeing aging as disease is dangerous. It results in negative attitudes and beliefs that decline is inevitable. There is biological aging, and some of the things that we have mentioned are going to occur. But let's focus on the things that we can do to combat what we've seen and combat these inaccurate views of the aging experience and causing us to overlook symptoms that are not normal aging. Remember, aging is a gradual and spontaneous process. Any abrupt change that interferes with activity of daily living is not normal aging. So let's spend a little more time on learning and memory. Part of our single story narrative is looking at cognitive impairment rather than cognitive ability as we live and age. We seem to think that dementia and cognitive impairment are usual with longer life, and that is simply not accurate. So let's begin by looking at learning and memory. Most researchers tend to agree that there is a general slowing in reaction time as we grow older. Slowing has been seen in perceptual, motor, and cognitive processes. Why is that? Again, it's complex. Nothing is ever one thing. There are changes in structural and central or peripheral nervous system functioning. We also experience differences in arousal, engagement, motivation, practice, or strategy that are associated with the individual in our cohort or time of birth. There are changes in educational strategies that are changes in our macro environment. Things become more complicated. Cell phones become smaller. Computers become smaller. Things like planners and apps and reminders and even pillboxes are new inventions for many. It is key to remember that remembering can also be contextually driven and socially constructed. Studies have shown that older adults do not perform as well on learning tests as younger adults. Again, the reason why is very complex, and it's partly due to how we before mentioned the decrease in processing speed for encoding. So we need more time to learn new things. Despite saying about old dogs, we do not lose the ability to learn new things. We simply need to take more time and intentional focus to make sure these are encoded. I consider this to be an organizational task, and spending the necessary time to organize or file things away, especially things that are meaningful to us. And this is partly due to motivation. We are more motivated to learn what we enjoy and want to learn. Let me say that again. We are more likely to encode / are motivated to learn what we enjoy and want to learn. We have less interest, possibly less ability to encode things we have no interest in. As goal direction changes, so does our motivation. If we believe the myths that we cannot learn, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that becomes a barrier. Like people who say, oh, I'm terrible with names. Well, over time, you may become terrible with names. Memory with age does become more focused on positivity. It becomes more focused on things we enjoy, things that bring us joy, long-term and practiced information that we've repeated time and time again. This is partly due to the developmental process of life story and the generative narrative that we've discussed. Stories that are essential to our identity development are things that tend to become more encoded in our brains. So let's look at what changes with age and what remains stable with age. Take a moment to digest this slide. Many of the normative changes that you're reading right now are slowing due to our brains being full, multi-system overload, if you will, or poor strategies for encoding, like I was talking about before, things that don't bring us joy or personal interest. These are all things that are trainable, things that are often attributed to age, but are likely partially related to training and the cohort effect. We should note this information is with regard to normative aging. That is when we're free of any disease or injury to our brains. It's also important to note that sometimes we perceive a lack in function in our memory that we incorrectly blame on age. For example, if you're having a hard time recalling information in a high time of stress, or while you're involved in one or more projects unrelated to what you're attempting to recall, then our memory might appear to be impaired when we really have just too much conflicting in our heads. Our hard drives are full, if you will. There are too many tabs open on the computer, as Ann Welliford says. It would bring me great joy that if the next time you're prompted to use the phrase senior moment, if you ask yourself, am I actually experiencing slow retrieval due to my full brain, multi-system overload, or poor strategies for encoding? Maybe I'm feeling stressed. These are all things that are trainable, all things that many in our younger cohorts are trained to do naturally, but they're also experiencing. So let's review these expectables again. We talked about brain, vision, hearing, gums, heart, bones and muscles, metabolism, large intestines, urinary tract, sexual health, and skin. And let's look at Ann Williford's Suite 16 with muscle mass and bone density, as we discussed, what we can do for balance and range of motion improvement. Our happiness increases, our well-being improves. The positive mindset is more common. We experience reduced stress, increased empathy, better emotional regulation. Our semantic memory, our crystallized memory, actually improves. Better procedural memory, better decision making, stronger integrative thought, stronger executive functioning. We have the wisdom of experience. We're better storytellers, and we have more self-confidence. So let's talk about the improvements with age. So we've mentioned that growth, maintenance, and adaptation are all part of development. So let's talk about that growth part of growing older, the wisdom, the well-being, and the emotional regulation. But let's stop for a moment and halt, if you will. If we are hungry, angry, lonely, and tired at 20 versus being hungry, angry, lonely, and tired at 80, let's think about all the skills we've accumulated, our treasure chest of coping mechanisms that fix hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. More wisdom, more well-being and happiness, and better emotional regulation. So what do we actually mean by emotional regulation and experience? Research on emotions and aging show that older adults are better than younger adults at regulating emotions and experiences. Older adults are motivated to pursue emotional satisfaction as opposed to younger adults who pursue information and data. This might look like having coffee with close friends as opposed to networking with colleagues. This is due to the fact that older adults and younger adults have different priorities in their daily lives, and these priorities often affect our emotions on a day-to-day basis. Changes in goal direction at different life phases changes motivation, and this is both influenced by and influences on emotions. So what does this really mean? Well, as we get older, as we mentioned previously, we will recall more positive experiences. We'll have more positive emotional experiences, and we'll be very selective in who we choose to associate with and what we choose to spend our time doing. We're going to use our cognitive resources on emotional information. Therefore, we're likely to be better about recalling information and memories that are emotional, that have meaning, that have value. Think about this in terms of what it means to have coffee with close friends as opposed to climbing the career ladder. Just thinking about these two scenarios may produce different emotions in you as you imagine yourself in these situations. And this is true whether you're 20 or 80. Research has shown that there is a positivity effect for recall of personal memories as well. That is, as we age, we tend to recall more positive memories, and that we prefer to recall more of these positive memories. It's a preference. We want to be careful here, though. We're not saying that the older we get, that we'll have no longer experienced negative events or memories, but that, on average, we will tend to show more of a positive bias with age. And why is that, do you think? We think that it's all driven by motivation. We're actually putting effort into being selective. So let's talk about that emotional well-being. What does this all mean for emotional well-being? Overall, we do see that there are some benefits associated with emotional well-being, such as faster recovery from illness, better physical health, and stronger social relationships. This really is an area where more research is needed to be certain that our research finding is more inclusive and less Western-centric. Okay, so let's talk about these senior moments that we asked you about earlier. A senior moment. Oh, I think I'm senile. I'm tired of showing you how to use GPS. Dr. Dan Johnson, a senior citizen, continues to maintain a vigorous practice despite his age. Gosh. So let's briefly pause and revisit the discussion about ageism. There are so many misconceptions and memory and learning when it comes to getting older. As we just learned, we have a lot of information to sort through in our brains as we get older. Think of your brain as a file cabinet or a computer packed full of everything you've ever experienced and learned. No wonder it takes longer to pull the correct file. Some common ageist language and images is what we see above. Take a walk down the birthday card aisle and see what you find as far as a plethora of ageist stereotypes, things that are supposed to be funny, but really are kind of mean. People think they're cute, but is the sentiment really cute? One way to combat this kind of ageism is change our outlook and actually say what we really mean. If we take senile or senior moment as an example, what are we really trying to say here? Perhaps we're really trying to say, well, I'm too distracted to recall that information, or I'm under a lot of stress at the moment, or I've got too many tabs open in my brain right now. Think about how what you really mean to say is very important. And if you fall back on, oh, I'm having a senior moment, how that perpetuates a negative message and is truly not actually accurate. The last bubble might be something we hear an adult child say to their parent. What is this really reflecting? This is reflecting that learning as we get older takes more practice to get it right. If you find yourself saying something like this or stepping in to help out when someone is taking too long to do something, then we might want to step back and rethink the situation. More times than not, we are letting our busy, fast-paced selves interfere with their interactions with older adults. We must make sure that we do not take away their ability to do for themselves. This is in direct opposition to person-centered care. So to continue, what do these ageist stereotypes look like? One of the most damaging consequences of the many ageist stereotypes is that we can fall down the dangerous path of lumping all older adults into the category of slow, grumpy, and stubborn. Be careful, though. Lumping older adults into sweet, adorable, and fun is just as dangerous and ageist and based on stereotypes. Think for a moment about the older people you know. These might be your participants, your family members, friends, people you know from church or another social circle. Are all of these people the same? Likely not. As we learned in part one, we are predisposed to create stereotypes and to lump people into categories. However, we need to be careful that we're also taking a step back and really finding out who each individual person is so that we can better know them and, if the time comes, provide better care. Research does show that as we age, we become more unique. We become more like ourselves and less like our peers. So take a look at these ageist stereotypes and cartoons and graphics and see how the messages are conflicting. This is one reason person-centered care is so important and often emphasized in training programs and in standards and in regulations. Because again, we become more unique and not the same as we age. Wow, I'm very grateful for your all's time and attention today. So let's recap the 5 things gerontologists want you to know about longevity and aging. So, what is successful aging? Is there a fountain of youth? If I need care, who will take care of me? How am I going to pay for this? And really, what should I expect as I grow older? So let's take a moment and reflect and answer some of these questions. What is successful aging to you? Do you think there's a fountain of youth, or is this a fountain of wellness? Who is actually going to take care of me? My family or friends? How in the world am I going to pay for all of this and the 6-legged stool? And what really should I expect as I grow older? This is one of my favorite parts of the presentation, thanking our partners. The modules we present are made possible by the webinar talents of Nico Stankulescu and World Events Forum. The decades-long partnership between VCU Gerontology and the Virginia Department of Social Services, the Longevity Project for a Greater Richmond, which is formerly AgeWave, and Senior Connections, the Capital Area Agency on Aging. We hope that the information you have learned today will help you promote positive steps toward longevity for yourself and others and create communities that are great places for all to live and grow old. Thank you again for your kind attention today. Please review the following contact information should you have follow-up questions or comments, and have a wonderful day.